Awesome. Great. We are 3 minutes past the hour, so I am going to get going. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. This session is about MBA application strategies, specifically for non-traditional candidates. I'm really passionate about working with non-traditional candidates and helping them find their way in the MBA application process throughout business school and even beyond, because I was in your shoes one day. So hopefully what follows gives you some ideas on how you can approach this process. Before we begin, though, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Laura Nelson. I have a BFA from Carnegie Mellon University, where I studied art, so that's studio art. I'm also a full-time MBA graduate of the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. I was a member of the admissions committee there. And before business school, I worked in film and television. So I had a very nonlinear path going into business school and also coming out of business school. Following graduation, I worked for my family business, which was in publishing, before entering the tech industry, where I held general management roles and most recently as VP of marketing at a software startup. My last two companies exited through acquisitions. I've been an MBA admissions consultant with two of the top consulting firms, and now with my own firm called MBA Pathfinders. My co-founder and I have a combined 30 years of admissions consulting experience, with dozens more years among our team members. So we really focus on the intentional choice to pursue an MBA and to change your life. We take a very holistic approach to your professional development and personal goals to facilitate your journey through this MBA application process and beyond. One last note, I'm a member of AIGAC, which is an association of graduate admissions
Agreed.
professionals. Yeah. We had our conference in Barcelona and Paris last week, where we met with 30 admissions directors from top programs, including those that you'll see on the next slide. So I've picked up a lot of great tips and insights straight from the admissions directors themselves. As a note, we are recording this session. I'm going to follow the chat as best as I can throughout this conversation, but I am allowing some time for Q&A at the end. So definitely repeat your question if you don't hear me address it as we go along. So as I mentioned, over the course of the last 15 years, I've worked on almost every program imaginable, including full-time, part-time, executive, online, dual degree applications at top programs like these, along with many others that are not represented on this slide. So now that you've learned a little about me, I'd love to learn a little more about you. So in the chat, if you could share what your career path is and what you want to do post-MBA, that'll give me a sense of where you're coming from and what the variety is in today's crowd. So I'll give you a minute to fill that in again. Let me know what career you're in right now and what you desire to pursue post-MBA. Great, I see X-Music, artist manager. That's right up my alley. Engineering, product and tech. Oh, a doctor. Nonprofit. Oil and gas. Lawyer. VC investing, healthcare. This is an awesome mix of careers and really represents or reflects that variety that we see going into MBA programs. We'll see a few other answers filtering in: event planning, international development, architect, military. That's awesome. Thank you guys again for coming. Before I dive into the full agenda today, I do want to pause and reflect on this journey that you are about to take. The MBA application process is not easy, and there's a whole industry of products and services around it. Perhaps you're familiar with a few of them, like Leland. I really encourage you to think about this moment in time in the context of your life and imagine how things can change for you, hopefully for the better. This process is so much more than putting together an application and sending it off into the ether. It really is a process of self-reflection, evaluation, discovery, and more. And I recognize that it incorporates some risk. You're here today because you want to embrace the challenges that come from the process of applying for and pursuing an MBA. You're changing your career, but you also want to grow in multifaceted ways. I understand this challenge and I'm here to support you in taking this leap to embark on what's hopefully a very transformational experience. So let's dive into today's agenda. Here are the things that I plan to cover. So first, we're going to identify a few classic myths about MBA student profiles. Then we're going to use the class profile data itself to really understand who's in these MBA cohorts. Next, we're going to take a look at some of the common challenges that non-traditional candidates face as part of this process. Then I'm going to walk through a couple quick exercises that you can use to articulate your career goals post-MBA. This is a really important element of any candidate's application process, but it's especially important for non-traditional candidates, many of whom are changing careers altogether. And I saw that in the chat, many of you are trying to make a big change. Then I'm going to highlight some examples of non-traditional candidates I've worked with in recent years, what they've studied, their pre-MBA careers, what careers they targeted, and what programs they landed in. And then finally, I will leave some time for Q&A at the end. Again, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as we go along, but that's not always easy to do. So if I miss something, please bring it up again at the end, and I'll get to as many as I can. So let's get started with these classic myths and who goes to business school in general. So you might think that there's an element of sameness across many of the programs and that admissions committees are looking for something specific that falls into line, something like this image, right? However, what I'm going to share is some of the data that helps to debunk some of these classic myths, including what's on the next page. So these are some of the classic myths that you may have in mind, or you might think that admissions committees are looking for. Some of these myths include that MBAs are people with business degrees from undergrad. They're people who have business jobs and business careers. They're people who are executives and in managerial roles. They're people who are in quant and analytical roles. And they're people who are in male-dominated industries or mostly male. I'm going to address these one by one using that class profile data I mentioned and highlight a couple programs for each. Here's a quick tip. If you aren't familiar with how to find class profiles for MBA programs, you can always Google class profile, the name of your target program, include the word MBA, and you should find that among the top searches that come up. So let's take a look at where folks are coming from, starting with undergrad majors. So take a look at this data about undergrad degrees. Business degrees are not essential for business school. So I've got Chicago Booth here and MIT Sloan, and you can see mixed degrees represented in Booth's class. For example, it does include business, but it also incorporates physical sciences, liberal arts, law, and a big chunk of other. Sloan takes a granular look at these undergrad degrees as well, and you can see a lot of diversity among the undergrad majors as well. So if you're worried you don't have a business degree, hopefully charts like these help to put you at ease. Next, let's take a look at pre-MBA careers. I'm going to look at the examples from Berkeley Haas and Yale School of Management. I love this mix at Haas, which is school is kind of known for, right, bringing in this really diverse class. There's a lot of variety here, and I love how they've broken out tech, entertainment, government, military, not-for-profit, and other sectors. For Yale, you do see some numbers in the classic categories like financial services and consulting, but they've also got significant numbers of people coming from government, nonprofit, and then you look down the list into healthcare, manufacturing, energy, real estate, transportation, and more. So if you're worried about your non-traditional career to date, hopefully these charts not only debunk that myth, but provide you with some reassurance. Next, let's take a look at work experience, specifically the years of work experience, looking at Fuqua and HBS's data. So Fuqua's latest class has an average of 6.1 years of work experience, and the average age is 29. Typically at this stage, people are not yet in executive or managerial roles, overseeing large teams, though this really does depend on your industry and on the company you're in. Compare this with Harvard Business School. So this class runs a little younger at 4.9 years of work experience, and this is down from an even 5 a year ago. Keep in mind that these are just averages. There are candidates with more work experience and some with less work experience. Some programs publish a range, whereas others, like these, simply share an average. So if you're worried that your tenure of work experience is not enough, or maybe that you haven't, ascended to the role of executive or manager, please don't worry. I more often than not work with clients who are individual contributors to their companies and in their roles. This is more the norm than you might think going into an MBA. Next, I want to take a look at test scores, which reveal a candidate's quant and analytical capabilities. So tests are just one way to assess a person's capabilities, and of course, not the only way. So check out the middle 80% ranges at your target programs if this data is available. What I love about Kellogg's data is that they share total score ranges. And many programs do this across the GMAT and GRE. They'll publish average GMAT scores and medium GREs. However, this is another slice at Ross. They share an 80% range for the GMAT, along with average quant and verbal scores for the GRE. It's a little tougher to understand the range of scores when you see an average, but understand, again, as with the work experience, you're just seeing an average, and there are scores higher and lower than what you see here. You might notice when you look at class profiles that not all programs publish the same test data, especially if they accept another test called the executive assessment. I recommend that you take the test that suits your abilities. You're not going to be dinged if you don't take the GMAT. That is another common myth. But if you are concerned that your score isn't the strongest facet of your application, remember that the admissions committee is going to review all parts of your application and consider your candidacy on a holistic basis. And the final point I want to address here in this section is gender representation. So MBA programs used to be dominated by men, but that's not the case anymore. And the numbers of women enrolled have been growing steadily year after year. And while we see the class composition at Columbia Business School kind of is more in the norm of the top 10 or 15 programs, with 44% of women in the most recent class, Wharton has made great strides. They've achieved 50% representation of women in its latest class. So hats off to them. This is not the most common split, but maybe a sign of things to come. And as you may know already, other professional programs like medicine and law have surpassed this mark long ago, and you're seeing higher enrollment rates of women. If you are a female applicant, don't despair. Top MBA programs are looking for more qualified women. This is not to say you're automatically in, right? But your gender certainly will not hold you back in this process. So I share this data here, not just to help you calibrate with your own scores, grades, characteristics, and more, but to show people that all people or professionals from all walks of life can find their paths in business school and be successful. So I am a great example of that. Next, we're going to go into common challenges, right? Well, we've discussed that the class profile attracts all types. I want to hone in on how to overcome any perceived weaknesses that non-traditional candidates sometimes face. There's common challenges that we see time and again, and as a non-traditional candidate, you've got to ensure that you have an understanding of how the MBA serves your objectives. So are you making an intentional choice or just hiding from an uncertain job market? Make sure that you are running towards something rather than away from it. Next, you need a hypothesis on how you'll pursue your goals. This involves the MBA curriculum and specific aspects of the program, and also a plan for how you're going to work through these. Then you must demonstrate that you're up to the task academically. So the competition is fierce, and if your transcripts don't reflect a success story, you'll have to employ other tools, and we'll talk about those. Finally, you need to exhibit quant capabilities. It's okay if you haven't taken quant courses since undergrad or even high school. There's opportunities to demonstrate your quant capabilities in many different ways. And this is an overview of 4 different sections. I'm going to go through these one by one. So first, starting with the growth objectives. Notice I didn't just say career here, but this is a real opportunity for professional developmental and personal growth. So if you're an MBA candidate, these need to be crystal clear. You may need to do some research to determine if this path makes sense. So network with anyone you can, anyone who you can reach who's in your desired career path or development path. You got to understand what you have today across experiences, soft skills, and technical capabilities that will transfer to this future objective, and identify what you need to know and do to reach that objective, right? That's where the MBA experience is going to come in. If you want to get tactical even farther ahead, develop a list of companies that you'll target for your internship and full-time job, and start building your network now. This is going to pay dividends in the future, right? So this is all about your growth objectives here. Whereas the next slide is more about the why MBA and why this program, right? You're going to have some time to discover new things, but take note that recruiting starts as soon as you get on campus. And if you've got access through special programs like Forte or the consortium and others, you might be recruiting even before school starts in the summer. So one of my recent clients had 2 internship offers before she started last year. Nevertheless, your application will require you to map the specific offerings of that program to suit your goals. So identify the courses, programs, extracurricular opportunities that will serve your career development and personal goals, and begin networking with anyone you know at your, target companies through informational interviews. And finally, ensure your research and understanding are articulated in the appropriate portions of the application. So I will acknowledge that, certain goals essays aren't always exhaustive for MBA applications. In fact, there are some programs that don't ask about careers at all, like MIT's, Sloan's famous cover letter. Admissions committees know that you might change your mind, but they want to see a working hypothesis coming in. Next, I want to talk about academic potential, because you do have to demonstrate your potential to succeed in the curriculum. So as much as the MBA is a career and developmental experience, it's also an academic degree. You've got to prove that competency. It's either through your undergraduate transcript or other means to show that you can handle the rigor of the curriculum. So if you haven't seen your transcript in a while, I recommend you request that ASAP, get some eyes on it. Because if there's any Ds or Fs, prepare to address them in your application. This is often done in the optional essay. You might also consider taking a course to demonstrate your commitment to the program. So a couple examples are the extension courses offered by UC Berkeley and UCLA Extension, and get an A, right? Finally, emphasize your transferable skills for your future career. You can not only do so in your resume and career essays, but also parts of your interview as well. So while your undergraduate degree may be a few years behind you, the academic potential is still important to admissions committees. And the final note in this section is that I want to dive deeper into the quant capabilities specifically. So I talked about academics on the last slide, but quant capabilities are a common concern among those with non-traditional careers, but you still need to demonstrate quant capabilities across in your application to show that you'll be able to handle, that program rigor. So check your test scores versus the averages, make sure they're aligned. I'm not saying you have to be at the average or above, but if you can hit those, say, 80% ranges, and, definitely have a balanced score, say, across verbal and quant, you'll be in a stronger position. If you have deficiencies in your test transcripts, again, consider that extension course. If you're short on time, MBA Math is another program that's worth looking into. So I've got the link up here. If you go to their site, there is a note in the footer that calls out the programs that are more receptive to seeing your transcript from this program. And then finally, ensure your quant and analytical capabilities shine through on your resume, if possible. Obviously, if you don't have that kind of work professionally, don't stretch to include it. But if you are doing work of an analytical nature, make sure that is emphasized, highlighted in your resume and other application materials as applicable. So I know I covered a lot about overcoming perceived weaknesses in this section, but this is where I spend a lot of time with non-traditional MBA applicants, and it's important to do everything you can to meet the demands of the program and the expectations of the admissions committees. So keep in mind, admissions committees do not seek cookie cutter candidates. You saw the diversity in the classes I showed a few slides ago, but take note about the diversity of the criteria, as you see for these two programs, right? They still do want to recruit interesting, ambitious, and collaborative individuals. This is really an opportunity to lean into your strengths as individuals from non-traditional careers, because ultimately you can leverage this process, as I've mentioned before, to change your career trajectory. And I know that sounds like a lofty goal, but this is a big investment of your time and your money, and you should really accept nothing less of the process and investment that you're making in yourself and in your career for the next 2 years. So the effort to stand out and shine often incorporates your post-MBA goals. I spend a lot of time here also because it's essential to creating your career narrative. So I want you to think about the MBA as a bridge to your future. I talk about transformation often because I truly believe that this is what most MBA candidates undergo over the span of 2 years. I'm going to talk about how to construct one facet of your career narrative, and I think this is one of the most challenging parts of the process. But the photo really does illustrate well what I'm trying to get at, right? The MBA is kind of that bridge in the middle that enables you to go from where you are today, which is on the left side, to a higher place on the right side. This is where you want to be, okay? So if you haven't done something like this already, I highly recommend you come back to this video or screenshot these exercises that I'm about to walk through that will help you articulate your career goals. The first exercise is kind of like a Mad Libs exercise, but it helps get your elevator pitch in a great spot. It's really this simple, right? You can articulate, where you are today in terms of your career and where you want to be. This is going to form the basis of your elevator pitch, as I mentioned, and is also something that comes up commonly in interviews or in video interviews and other areas of the application. So it's not a bad idea to get started on that early. So I'll pause for a second and take a sip of water. You can screenshot that or again, refer to the video when you come back. So the next exercise is a little more tactical on what type of job you want to pursue. So here I have an example of a rotational program at Blizzard Entertainment, but you can peruse your target companies and industries to find out what makes sense for you. So find a role that looks desirable to you post-MBA. Next, take a look what the role is all about, right? Is it something you envision yourself doing day to day? And then importantly, look at what the position demands in terms of hard and soft skills. So I will say that this one is a little generic, but generally you're going to find a list of requirements or a wish list of experiences and skills that are needed for the role. And as you go through this role, ask yourself these questions. Which of these skills and experiences do I have? Which of these do I need? How will the MBA experience help me get them? And then even further beyond that question, which specific courses, programs, extracurriculars, and more are going to facilitate getting a job just like this one? If you do some of this work up front, you're going to save a lot of time when it comes to articulating this as part of the application process, and then eventually in the internship interview process. You're also going to be able to define, what is your post-MBA goal, and why are you a good fit to pursue them, and why you need an MBA at all, and why this program. So hopefully this gives you a framework for shaping up your post-MBA goals. And I know I went through that really quickly, but again, it's a place I spent a lot of time, and this is really the core of the transformation you're about to undergo, not just with your career, but that whole self that you bring to this experience, right? Couple things before I get to the Q&A, and I'm leaving a lot of time. I see a lot of activity in the chat, which is awesome. But as I said before, I really want to highlight some non-traditional candidate success stories. I've worked with hundreds of candidates over the years, and many of them come from backgrounds just like yours. We saw great variety in the chat. So here's just a sampling of a few recent success stories. And these are not their real names, but they are the nuts and bolts of what, where they're coming from and where they're going. So Cassie came to me with a university degree in international relations and social anthropology. So that's interesting, but as you may have noticed, it's not a business degree at all, right? Her background is really interesting. She worked as a press wrangler in the Trump White House. Regardless of your politics, there's lots of stories to share here. You can imagine how interesting that was. From there, she moved on to crisis communications. She wrote in her essays about pivoting her career into social enterprise, and she just recently graduated from Columbia Business School. So this is like the perfect model of how to leverage the MBA, from a less traditional career path, right? One that doesn't seemingly make sense or lead to somewhere traditional, and pivoting into something new. And by the way, although we wrote about social enterprise in her essays, she actually ended up pursuing marketing. The next example from Connor, he actually did have an undergrad degree in business. He did well in it, but then his career took a lot of turns. So he opened a series of liquid nitrogen ice cream shops. It had several stores. Talked to me about crying over a Yelp review and, his production process and managing all types of employees, like not a typical job that one gets out of an undergrad business degree. After he sold off his business, he then went into a ton of different kind of unrelated businesses. He had a hanger company. He was doing events. Right before COVID hit, he was going to open kind of like a speakeasy type of business near Miami, or in Miami, I should say. But he really just was tired of like the entrepreneur life and the uncertainty. So he decided he wanted a change and to go into consulting. So he just finished up his first year at Fuqua. Another example, Andrea studied media and communications in undergrad. Then she led a career in brand management at major cosmetic companies. So this one kind of reads more like what we'll call closer to a traditional career, but her background really was a little less conventional than maybe what's coming across the page here. She wrote about pivoting into AR and VR, so that's alternate or virtual reality tech, and she's just finishing up her first year at HBS. And then the last example from recent clients, and I know many of you on this session are veterans, so here is one example from your cohort. Blake is an Army veteran. He had a background in biology and engineering. He pursued an MBA to completely change his course, as many of you are seeking to do as well. And he's about to enter Ross this fall. He's going to pursue his dream in pro sports, specifically in business operations and analytics. So, what a pivot for him, right? And what a change for all 4 people, on this slide. And there's, thousands more stories just like these, right? These are just a few of the ways that non-traditional candidates have really leveraged this experience to take that leap and do something completely different. And you all have the opportunity to do so as well. A couple more things before we get to Q&A. You may be wondering what MBA admissions consulting is if you're new to this process. Some are more familiar with the role a consultant can play to help edit your resume or essays, but I really want to inform you that it is so much more. To start, here's a little color on some of the activities that a consultant can help you with. They can really dig into your motivations, not just career-wise, but personally and developmentally, to understand how the MBA can facilitate all of those goals. They can help you develop a personal brand. I think this is so critical to presenting yourself across your application materials and as part of this process. Next, they can help you identify your risk profile. And what I mean by that is, some people have a really kind of firm idea of where they want to go to school, or like, a certain ranking, say top 5 or top 10 or whatever, and are okay with taking the chance that they might not get in. Whereas other people are really dead set on enrolling in an MBA program next fall. And, they want to diversify their risks, right? Maybe apply to some reach programs, some competitive programs, and some safety schools. So that's something that a consultant like me can help you determine, right? Next, you really need to create a new resume for the MBA process. There are key criteria that you need to meet to ensure this is effective and relates your experience to admissions committees. Of course, many of you are worried about the essays. Like, that is a big part of the engagement, developing the narratives and ensuring that they're expressed through your application materials. And then finally, preparing for interviews, videos, and other touch points. A good MBA admissions consultant can help you with those things too. So if you are considering hiring someone, make sure that they check off on some of these points, right? A quality admissions consultant is going to partner in your success from end to end. They're going to be the advisor on that personal brand. They are going to leverage all of their experience and, all of their candidate stories to help you. And I think importantly, they're going to go beyond the superficial aspects of the MBA application process. So there's many facets of applying for an MBA, and all of them require specific attention to detail. However, I implore you to partner with someone who can help you focus not only on those details, but the big picture, that change that you are trying to make. And the last point I want to emphasize here is that you need to partner with someone who is going to believe in your candidacy. So I can only speak for myself and my experience, but I can't work with anyone, or someone rather, who I don't believe is making a sound decision. And I want you to understand that this trust and belief is paramount to the process and to the partnership. So I know that is a lot, but as I said before, I do want to leave a lot of time for Q&A. Use the chat tool to answer your questions. I'm going to get to as many as possible. I do have a discount code available for you. So if you're on this session, you are eligible for 10% off of hourly or package services. And this is valid for the next 2 weeks. But let me dive into the questions. So I know there are many. And again, if I don't get to all of your questions, we can certainly cover them in an intro call. So I'm going to scroll up. I saw some coming in as I was talking. So I want to address them as many as I can. And one of the first questions I saw was about work experience being a firm qualifier. What if you only have 4 years of work experience? So the numbers I shared, HBS 4.9, Fuqua 6, those are just averages. So you actually do see a number of people who have fewer years of work experience. Many of the programs will say they don't have a hard and fast number, but typically, the average is around 5 or 6 years, because they do want people coming in who do bring, experience that enriches the cohort. So I actually had 4 years of work experience when I joined my MBA program. So I don't think 4 years alone is going to be a disqualifier for you. The recording will be available. So Erica's been answering that question in the chat. Definitely sign up for Leland Plus so you have access to this. For those who already have an MS, would the focus be more on undergrad or grad performance? I don't know if I have enough detail to say definitively, but I will say, like, admissions committees overall have somewhat of a recency bias when it comes to your professional career and in your degrees. So say you had some rough spots in your undergrad and you did better in your master's program, that's the upward trajectory is a nice story to tell. If the situation were flipped, that will be a little more difficult to mitigate, not impossible, but that's where the course can come in handy. And, you can prove your commitment to, the MBA curriculum overall. Obviously they're going to look at both transcripts, but without detail on, what you studied both undergrad and grad school, I can't get a little more specific there. Can I break down the advantages, disadvantages of someone pursuing their MBA sooner in their career versus later? It really depends. It kind of depends on, what you're doing and what you're trying to do and the competitiveness of the program you're applying to as well. There's lots of dimensions to consider here. You will find people with, a couple years work experience in some programs, and then you'll find some people who have like 15 or 20 on the really high end. And I would say those are the outliers, right? But what the top programs are really looking for, people who have, spent a few years in the workforce, have some practical experience and insight to bring to those class conversations, to case studies, and, have something to contribute to class. So it kind of depends on your personal situation. I don't have enough to go on here, but, there are life factors that also come into play as well that, may help to answer the question for you. I will point out too that, there are some masters of management programs that don't require any work experience. So for example, like Chicago Booth just started a master of management program. That is kind of more of a pre-MBA situation, right? It's not as, advanced, or should I say, like, the cohort is not as experienced as the MBA one. I won't ever call Chicago Booth not advanced, because it is a terrific school and it is competitive to get into. But if you are earlier in your career and not sure about the MBA, you might want to take a look at, masters in management programs. Also consider like master in some function, right? Master of finance or master of accounting or master of marketing, for example, if you are wanting to hone in on a certain function. Can you list past test scores that have been expired but were good in addition to your new score? Most admissions committees want to see a score within the last 5 years. So I don't think they're going to take, I don't want to say seriously, because I don't want to speak for them, but, they're going to look at what is in the purview of the last 5 years. The question, how does the AdCom look at a profile if the undergrad gap is 2.7, postgrad's 3.1, GRE is 330, coming from management research and social impact background? I do like the upward trajectory in the GPA here. That's promising, great GRE score. So I think it's really going to come down to that career story. How does that narrative put together? How's that brand put together? What do you want to do post MBA? How does the school fit into that? Right. A great test score can really help to offset that GPA. I think in this case, I would recommend writing the optional essay and giving a little context to what was happening in undergrad. And yeah, I think, interesting components here. Should we show our previous lower scoring attempts on the GMAT and GRE if we manage to achieve a higher score later? So most programs are going to take your high score, if not all of them, right? They will not super score, like take your highest verbal and your highest quant, but they do respect retaking the test, right? Showing your persistence. So I don't think that's a bad thing at all, especially, if you've already reported scores in, you take it again and you do better. I think that, that's great. They're going to take your high score. Another question about GPA. If you have a 2.1 GPA but faced a lot of adversity being a first-generation college student and took a non-traditional route, healthcare to marketing, what would be the best things to leverage in my application? I've held managerial roles, had my own agency now, but feel it's not enough to show my growth. You have your own agency. Like if you are the boss of your company, I think that is tremendous, right? That takes a lot of guts, especially if you have employees working for you and you're accountable and responsible for them and a revenue target. I think that shows tremendous growth. I think that, the GPA you're going to have to offset with, some context about your personal story, what was happening in undergrad. And I have worked with candidates who are in your situation and who have struggled because they've, haven't had that model in their family, right? So, the fact that you came through it is amazing. I think to offset that, a great test score is going to help, taking a course, getting an A will be great. That's just going to bring your skills more current and prove that you are, again, committed to pursuing that MBA. One question about online MBAs more flexible with non-traditional students than in-person ones. I would say the admissions criteria, that's what's more flexible. So in my experience, like the standard isn't as high, not to say they're not quality programs, because I think it is a great option for those who, cannot take 2 years out of the workforce and be in person somewhere. But, the test score averages aren't as high, or they're not as competitive. There's not as many applications, right? So I think it's less about non-traditional background and more about just, meeting certain criteria to get in. Is there some age limit? 30s is a good age to apply to a full-time program, or should I wait for an EMBA? This is another one where there's like a huge gray area. I had classmates in their 30s. There was even a couple classmates in their 40s. I'm working with a candidate now who's about to turn 40 and he's pursuing the full-time MBA. I've seen this go both ways, right? The EMBAs typically are, yes, more seasoned in their career, 30s, 40s. What I have seen, and again, this is only my experience, is that they tend to be on a career path that they are happy with, and maybe they're at a company they're happy with and that's sponsoring them, right? So there's kind of like stability and they're content with their path. The candidates who are older, who are pursuing the full-time MBA, tend to be more, career changers. They're looking to get off the track they're on. They're hoping that, this is going to be that inflection point to get them to another place. Another question, are you allowed to be interested in more than one possibility career-wise, i.e. pivoting into entrepreneurship or consulting, or are you better off picking one for the application process and figuring it out once you get in? It really depends on the verbiage of the application here. But one thing that I did pick up from the conference last week that came up time and again was this idea of being adaptable and flexible. Because the job market, that is, has been, unpredictable lately. There's been a lot of layoffs in tech and other industries, and, it's hard to forecast and understand the health of the job market. They really have encouraged candidates to be flexible. When I say they, admissions committees. There are some questions that ask for your plan B. One that comes off top of my head is Duke Fuqua specifically asks for the alternative career path. I think if you are presenting like two divergent ideas and don't have support for enough for one or the other, it may come across as a little scattered, but I think it does kind of depend on the presentation, right? But I think it is smart to have a backup plan and potentially work on parallel paths once you get to school and are recruiting. And, a lot of people have been doing that for a lot of years, right? Like, they wrote about one thing, they're going to pursue that for internship recruiting, but they're also going to check out something else as well. Are there schools that prefer non-traditional candidates for deferred admissions process? Which schools are the most conducive for deferral as a non-traditional candidate? I have not seen one program that like favors non-traditional candidates in the deferred process any more than the full-time. Just like the full-time process, they're looking to create a diverse and interesting cohort. So, they're optimizing for, what your career looks like a couple years down the line when you decide to, re-enroll in the MBA program. So, nothing specific comes to mind there in my experience. Do I recommend part-time programs for people who are trying to work full-time to pay for school? I do think this is a great option because you can still go to a great program and avail yourself of all the resources, right? I did in my experience at Ross, I took a night course. So I was in groups with part-time MBAs and they had a different experience than me. Of course, like they're working all day, they're coming to this 3-hour class at night. I thought it would be incredibly difficult, but they were in careers that they were enjoying, right? And some of them were sponsored by their companies. And, this was a much less significant hit to the wallet than the full-time program. So I think it does have its advantages if you're looking to save and maybe looking to get into a more competitive program. So that's something to consider as well. Like the part-time criteria, kind of how I was talking about the the online program criteria can be a little less strict for great programs. Sorry, just scrolling through some are a little like specific for individual certain situations. So I can't answer all of those particulars on this, but I will pick up a couple more questions. Here's a good one. What advice do you give to people who are not getting good feedback while reaching out to these schools regarding their MBA programs? I would start just as like a process, right? Think about, how you want to engage with these programs. Start with kind of the general info sessions, right? Start with something wide and, freely available before you start to get specifics. And maybe you've already done that, right? So, if you've attended an info session, if you've gone to a coffee chat with admissions, if you're now trying to link up with, say, a student ambassador, and maybe that's where the frustration is, I would circle back to admissions and, give them feedback that you're having a hard time reaching a person with X background or Y background, and can they link you up with someone? I will say it's early June right now, and a lot of the programs have just finished and people are transitioning to their summer internships. Some are, moving all over the country or world to do those internships. So if there is a delay in hearing back from them, that could be a reason why. However, like if you want to reach someone to talk to, right, just circle back to admissions, demonstrate your interest. I'm not saying like be annoying, right? But they should have people who are responsive and who are, available to talk about their offerings with you. It is disappointing when you don't hear back from people, like when there isn't a strong culture of responsiveness. And, I won't name programs, but some are much better at this than others. Someone asked, what does it mean to be waitlisted only? So generally, a program will put a candidate on the wait list if they just don't have all, thumbs up at the moment. So there are things that they might appreciate about your candidacy. They might want to see a higher test score. They might want to see, further career development, something. They're just not ready to admit you. Depending on the program, they have a different process for providing updates and continuing engagement with the program. And, those who are proactive, I've seen success with getting off the wait list. It is, pretty nuanced, and it does vary by the program and also like the demand that the program is seeing that year. The question is, have you ever had someone get denied and on an early round that wound up getting in after reapplying a year in a later round? So I do want to clarify, you can only apply to a program once a season. So, for example, you can't apply to Harvard in round 1 and round 2. I have worked with candidates who have gotten denied in an early round 1 year and then reapplied and been successful. They have shown some, demonstrated growth, maturity, improvements in different facets of their applications. But you can only apply to a program once in an application season. There's a question, let's see. What are the pros and cons of doing a concurrent MBA, such as Berkeley's MBA program? I'm a little unclear on that question. Is it about dual degrees? A lot of people say the JD MBA at the same time. Okay, it isn't a JD MBA. When I work with candidates across dual degree programs, there's got to be a strong case for needing, that knowledge. Applying for the dual degree program doesn't necessarily improve your chances, right? You still have to compete among, the cohort and meet the standards of both the JD and the MBA program. I would say, pros are if it fits your career goals and makes sense, great. You can get a couple degrees in, say, 3 years, right? Cons are definitely time and money, right? It's more time out of the workforce, and, it's a challenging course, right? These 2 degrees make you, stretch yourself and use different parts of your brain. So I think that's incredibly difficult, but, it can make sense for certain career goals. One question is about whether schools defer MBA applicants to master and management programs, if they're a better fit for that. Yes, I've seen that. They may suggest hey, come to our master's in management program. We think you're a better fit here. I've seen that also with, Columbia Business School has a 2-year MBA, but they also have a program called the J-term. I have seen candidates offered admission to the J-term if, they will consider that accelerated MBA instead of the 2-year program. So I think that gets me through many of the questions you have. I know I couldn't answer them all, but really appreciate your time and attention tonight. And yeah, if you have further questions, of course, hit the QR code. You can reach me on my profile. And thank you so much. I hope this was helpful, and have a great rest of your night.